The snow gave a sharp crack beneath the messenger's iron-shod boots, tearing through the silence that hung over the dying forest like a shroud. He didn't waste breath knocking on Cora's weathered cabin door. Instead, he pressed a thick roll of parchment straight into her hands, sealed with a heavy blot of crimson wax stamped with a snarling wolf's head. It was a summons, an invitation to the bonding ceremony of the man who had once called her his mate. He wanted her standing in that crowd. He wanted her tears on display, while he crowned another woman in her place. Cora looked down at the seal and felt nothing but a hard, quiet resolve settle into her bones. Whatever mourning she'd had in her was already spent. The axe fell again, splitting another pine mound clean in half with a crack that echoed through the trees. She didn't pause. She set another log on the block and swung once more, wood chips scattering into the tangled braid of her hair. Her breath came out in ragged white clouds, mixing with the smell of sap and the metallic bite of a coming storm. Sweat beaded on her skin. Despite the brutal cold, physical work was the only thing that kept the hollow ache in her chest from swallowing her whole. That ache lived just beneath her collarbone, where a mating mark had once been branded into her skin. Now there was only a thin, pale scar, proof that she'd been cast off. The sound of approaching hooves broke her rhythm. She rested the axe head against the ground, dragging a dirty forearm across her brow, and watched as a lone rider emerged from the tree line. It was Gregory, second to the Ashdown Alpha, looking wildly out of place against the bleak landscape, his cloak trimmed in fine sable, his whole skittish at the scent of her run-down cabin. Cora offered no greeting. She simply watched him swing down from the saddle, her stare flat and exhausted. She'd cried her last tear half a year ago. Gregory shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her eyes, a specialty of everyone in the Ashdown pack these days, looking anywhere but at the wreckage their alpha had left behind. "Cora," he said, his voice rough, stripped of its usual command. "Gregory," she answered, her throat scratchy from disuse. She hadn't spoken a word to anyone in nearly 3 weeks. "Long ride out here. Did you take a wrong turn looking for the outhouse?" He winced, then reached into his cloak and produced a thick envelope of fine vellum, holding it out like it might burn him. "Desmond sent this. He wants you to have it." Cora didn't reach for it. She already knew exactly what it was. Everyone in the territory did. Desmond, the freshly crowned alpha of Ashdown, was taking a mate, Liana of the Riverlands, a calculated alliance, a wolf of impeccable bloodline. Everything Cora wasn't, put it on the stump, she said, her voice empty of feeling. Gregory stepped forward, boots sinking into frozen mud, and laid the parchment beside her axe. "He expects you there, Cora, does he?" She let out a brittle, humorless laugh. "What for? To refill the wine glasses?" "Don't," Gregory said quietly, finally meeting her gaze. Pity swam in his eyes, and she despised him for it. He wants the allied packs to see there's no bad blood, that the handover was clean. Her hand drifted to her collarbone without her meaning it to. Desmond had rejected her before the entire pack council, called her wolf weak, her blood common, her presence beneath him. He'd torn the bond out of her chest with all the tenderness of a slaughterhouse and left her bleeding on cold stone. "Tell Desmond he can take his clean handover and choke on it." Gregory sighed, his breath a pale cloud. "If you don't come, it'll look like defiance. You know how he is. He could strip you right to the fringe lands. Cast you out completely. I'm already cast out, Gregory. I'm just doing it on my own terms, inside his precious borders." She lifted the axe again. "Tell him I got the message. Tell him whatever you like. Just leave my land." He lingered a moment longer, maybe hoping to see her crumble, maybe hoping for forgiveness he had no right to ask for. When she brought the blade down again with brutal precision, he finally turned, mounted, and rode off without another word. Once the hoofbeats faded into silence, Cora let the axe drop. Her hands trembled. She crossed to the stump and picked up the vellum. The wax was thick, self-important. She snapped it open. Inside, elegant gold script announced the union of Alpha Desmond and Lady Liana. At the bottom, in Desmond's own jagged handwriting, was a personal note. Your presence is required. It is time you accepted your place. He didn't just want her there as decoration. He wanted her humiliation on full display. Wanted Liana to see exactly what kind of broken, mud-streaked creature he'd discarded to make room for someone better. He wanted her to lower her head and accept the new order. She stepped back inside. The half-fire had nearly died. She stared at the invitation, then at the embers. It would burn beautifully, but she didn't throw it in. Instead, she crossed to the small, cracked mirror over her wash basin and studied her reflection. Sunken cheeks, shadowed eyes, hair like a crow's nest, a threadbare sweater that reeked of smoke and wet fur. She looked precisely like the pitiful, cast-off thing Desmond wanted her to be. Something inside her shifted. Not the burning fury of a jilted lover, but something colder and far more deliberate. If she rotted here, he'd have won. Not this time. She whispered to the empty room. She folded the invitation and tucked it into her pocket. She wouldn't attend the wedding to bow her head. She'd attend to disappear, crossing the High Ridge Pass, leaving Ashdown territory behind for good, timing her exit for the exact day of his bonding, so her scent would vanish from his lands the very moment he tried to claim someone new. Let him feel just how final it was. She grabbed her rucksack and began to pack. The High Ridge was merciless, even at the height of summer. In the teeth of early winter, it was a death sentence. Cora had been walking for 2 days straight. Her boots had split at the seams, leaking icy water with every stride. Wind screamed through the narrow passes, flinging needles of ice against her exposed skin. Her Wolf, usually a steady source of inner warmth, stayed cold and silent in the back of her mind, still shell-shocked from the severed bond. Hunger gnawed at her. She'd managed to trap a scrawny hare the first night, but she was burning far more than she could replace Dot by the second evening. As the sky bruised into deep purple, she knew she needed shelter or she'd freeze where she stood. That's when she caught the smell of wood smoke, not wildfire, but a deliberate, contained burn of pine and dry oak. She dropped instantly into a crouch behind a snow-covered boulder, every sense on alert. Beneath the smoke was another scent, male, powerful, unfamiliar, lacking the pine and iron signature of Ashdown. A rogue might kill her for her boots alone, but freezing was a certainty, and a rogue was only a possibility. She drew her hunting knife and crept forward. Through a gap in the rocks, she spotted a sheltered clearing beneath a rock overhang, a fire crackling in its center. A man sat beside it, turning a spit, and the smell of roasting venison hit her stomach like a fist. He wasn't the gaunt, desperate figure she'd expected. Broad-shouldered beneath a worn leather coat, dark hair tied back, jaw shadowed with rough stubble. He looked weathered by the road, but completely unbothered by it. She shifted her weight to retreat, and her boot snapped a hidden twig. The crack rang out like a gunshot. The man didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply stopped turning the spit and looked straight toward the boulder she was hiding behind. His eyes caught the firelight, a startling, piercing amber. "If you're planning to stab me, get on with it," he called, his voice a low, rough rumble that carried through the cold. "If you're just hungry, sit down. This deer's too much for one man anyway." She hesitated, gripping the knife tighter. "I can hear your stomach from here," he added dryly. Slowly. She stepped into the firelight, knife still visible but angled down. His gaze swept over her, assessing, not leering, taking in her ragged clothes, the shiver she couldn't hide, and finally the pale scar peeking above her slipped collar. His eyes lingered there a heartbeat before returning to her face. He didn't ask about it. That, more than anything, earned him a flicker of trust. "Put that away," he said, nodding toward a flat stone across from him. "I'm Gideon. Sit. Get warm." She sheathed the blade, but kept her hand near the hilt as she settled onto the stone, leaning as close to the fire as she dared. The heat felt like salvation. "Cora," she offered. He nodded, sliced a thick cut of meat free with a wicked-looking hunting knife, and held it out to her on the blade itself. She took it without hesitation, ignoring the grease scalding her fingers, and tore into it. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months. They ate in silence. The only sounds the crackling fire and the wind howling above the rocks. "You're traveling light for a mountain crossing," Gideon observed eventually, wiping grease from his beard. "No pack scent on you either." "I travel alone," she said, defensive. "A lone wolf, inside Ashdown territory," he mused. Desmond doesn't usually tolerate strays this close to his border. She stiffened at the name. "I'm not a stray. I'm leaving." He leaned back, ankles crossed, studying her in the firelight. "Leaving in a hurry." It seemed straight into a blizzard. "Running from something. Or someone." "Neither." She stared into the flames. "There's just nothing left behind me worth staying for." His gaze turned heavier. "A severed bond is no small thing to carry." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "I didn't ask for your sympathy." "I didn't offer any," he replied evenly. "Sympathy doesn't warm you or feed you. I was only stating a fact." Something in her eased slightly at that. His bluntness matched her own bitterness perfectly. "It's an old wound. Doesn't hurt anymore." The lie sat obvious between them. If it doesn't hurt, why risk your life on the high ridge ahead of the main roads? He pressed. She pulled her knees to her chest. Something about this stranger's stillness loosening her tongue. Maybe just the relief of finally being warm. Because the main roads run through the capital, and the capital's busy getting ready for a wedding. His brows lifted. "Ah, the Alpha's bonding. You've heard. News travels. A significant alliance. Desmond of Ashdown and Lyanna of the Riverlands, consolidating power across the north." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "You were his mate." It wasn't a question. He'd already pieced it together. The scar, the location, the venom in her voice. "I was," she said, hard-edged. "Until I wasn't. Half-blood, small wolf. No pedigree, no talent for court games. So he threw me out to make space for someone who has all three. And now he marries her," Gideon said thoughtfully. "And you freeze on a mountain instead." "I got an invitation." She pulled the crumpled vellum from her pocket and tossed it near the fire. "He wants me to watch, to accept my place." Gideon leaned forward, broke the remaining wax, and read it. A low, dark laugh escaped him. Not a pleasant sound. "Arrogant, petty," she corrected. "Both," he agreed. His eyes caught fire in the firelight, suddenly sharp with intent. "Are you going to let him get away with it?" "I'm leaving. That's my way of not playing along. Running is exactly his game." "Cora, it proves him right, proves you're weak. That you couldn't handle it. That you slunk off into the dark like a beaten dog." Her pride flared. "What would you have me do? March in there in rags and demand a seat at the high table? I have no power, no pack. If I show up, I hand him the satisfaction of breaking me in public." He studied the invitation a moment longer, then tossed it back to her. She caught it on reflex. "What if you didn't walk in as his discarded mate?" he asked softly. "What if you walked in as someone he couldn't touch?" She scoffed. "And how exactly do I manage that?" He didn't smile. He rose to his full height, towering over the fire, his shadow stretching long against the rock wall. Reaching into his coat, he pulled something metal-free and tossed it through the air. She caught it. Heavy, solid gold. A medallion, intricately carved. A wolf's head crowned in winter thorns. The crest of the Alpha King. Her breath caught. Her eyes snapped up. The rough leather coat, the beard, the solitary camp. All of it a disguise. Or maybe just a preference. "My name is Gideon," he said. And this time his voice carried a weight that made her dormant wolf whimper in instinctive reverence. "King of the Northern Territories." She scrambled up, the medallion burning against her palm, and started to bow her head in submission. "Don't," he snapped. She froze. "I have enough people bowing to me," he said, rounding the fire toward her. "What I need is someone who can look an arrogant alpha dead in the eye and make him bleed." Without ever throwing a punch, dawn spilled over the ridge, painting the snow in soft pink and burnt orange. Cora stood near the edge of the overhang, staring down into the valley. Her thoughts a tangled storm. Behind her came the clink of armor. They hadn't been alone in the night after all. A dozen elite guards, clad in dark iron and fur, had camped a mile below, waiting for first light. They'd arrived at dawn and knelt in the snow before their king, turning the modest campsite into something resembling a royal court. Gideon came to stand beside her, the worn leather coat gone, replaced by dark silk and a heavy fur mantle clasped in silver. The traveller had vanished. Only the monarch remained. "You're quiet," he said. "Eyes on the valley." "I shared roasted rabbit with a king, yelled at him, and never curtsied," she said flatly. "I'm trying to figure out if I'll be executed before or after breakfast." He let out a short, genuine laugh. "I like the yelling. More honest than anything I usually hear in Ashdown." She turned to face him. "Why are you going to this wedding?" His amusement vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Desmond's ambitious. Too ambitious. This marriage unites the two largest packs on my southern border. Trade routes, timber, a good portion of my military reserves. You think he's planning to rebel? I think he's testing how far the water goes before it pushes back." Gideon turned to face her fully. "He sent me an invitation, not a request for blessing, a summons, to watch him prove he's my equal. He wants every allied alpha in that hall to see him pull the king down from the mountain." Cora understood instantly. It was the same tactic Desmond had used on her, just scaled up to an entire kingdom. Humiliate the weak to elevate the strong. "And you're going to let him?" "I'm going to attend," Gideon corrected. "But I have no intention of playing the role he's written for me. I need to remind Desmond, and every alpha in that hall, exactly where real power sits. I need to break his illusion of control." He stepped closer, close enough that she caught the scent of ozone and cold iron beneath his restrained aura. "That's where you come in." She crossed her arms against a gust of wind. "I don't follow. I'm nobody. I'm the trash she threw out." "You underestimate the symbolism," he said. "Desmond discarded you because he decided you weren't worthy. He made your rejection public to prove his judgment was superior. So what happens when the king of all Lycans arrives at his bonding ceremony with his discarded mate on his arm, dressed in royal colors?" Her eyes widened as the plan's cruelty and brilliance both landed at once. "It tells the entire hall," he continued, voice dropping, "that Desmond's judgment was flawed, that what he threw away, the crown found worth keeping. It elevates you above him. He'll have no choice but to welcome you as an honored guest in the very home he cast you out of." Her breath caught as she pictured it. Desmond's face, Lyanna's smile faltering, the whispers rippling through the pack council. The ghost pain in her chest flared once, then went utterly numb, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. "You want to use me as a weapon," she said plainly. "Yes." He didn't dress it up or soften it. He respected her too much to lie. "I use you to destabilize Desmond. You use me to get your revenge. A fair trade." She looked down at her muddy boots, her calloused hands. "Look at me, Gideon. I'm a woman who lives in a shack in the woods. I don't know court etiquette. I don't have gowns or jewels or manners. Desmond will laugh me out of the hall." He reached out, not touching her face, careful not to overstep, and set a warm, heavy hand on her shoulder. "A gown can be tailored. Jewels can be bought. Dirt washes off." His amber eyes held hers. "But the fire I saw in you last night, the woman who looked a king in the eye and told him she didn't want his pity, that can't be bought." "That's exactly what I need." He stepped back, giving her room to breathe. "We have 3 days before the ceremony. My southern estate is a day's ride from here. Tutors, tailors, whatever you require. Agree, and you ride at my side. When it's over, you'll have a place in my court, safe from Desmond forever. Or you can walk down this mountain, vanish into the snow, and let him win." She looked back toward the trail she'd carved through the drifts. She thought of her freezing cabin, of the wax seal, of the arrogant script demanding her presence. She pulled the crumpled invitation from her pocket and held it up, meeting his eyes, her jaw set, her cynical heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. "I'll need an obscenely expensive dress," she said. Gideon's mouth curved into a sharp, dangerous smile. "You'll have the finest one in the kingdom." He turned to his men. "Saddle the horses. We ride for the winter estate." As the camp burst into organized motion, Cora looked at the invitation, one last time. She didn't burn it. She folded it carefully and slid it back into her pocket. She intended to hand it back to Desmond herself. The bathwater scalded her frozen skin with ruthless efficiency, but she didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still while two stone-faced maids scrubbed away weeks of mountain grime, pine sap, and dried blood. The water clouded fast. They were in the east wing of Gideon's winter estate, a sprawling fortress of dark stone and heavy timber tucked into a high valley, smelling of beeswax, aged wood, and old power. No gilded cages here. No soft velvet lounges. This was a stronghold built for a warrior. A stern older woman named Martha oversaw the maids, offering no pity, no soft glances. She regarded Cora the way a blacksmith regards raw iron, something to be heated, hammered, and reshaped. Her hands are so rough, one maid murmured, working a pumice stone over Cora's palm. Leave them, Martha snapped, handing Cora a thick towel as she rose from the tub. The king didn't ask for a porcelain doll. He asked for a weapon. Calluses prove she survived. Cora dried off, skin flushed from the heat, feeling lighter. The physical grime of her exile rinsed away, though her chest stayed tight. 3 days. In 3 days she'd stand before Desmond again. The wardrobe they brought wasn't full of soft, floating gowns. Gideon had understood the assignment perfectly. Every garment was structured, heavy, commanding. They chose a gown of midnight blue velvet, so deep it seemed to swallow light whole. The bodice was boned rigid, forcing perfect posture. Long fitted sleeves were stitched at the cuffs with silver thread that flashed like a blade's edge. It didn't make her look delicate. It made her look like a storm about to break. Martha fastened a heavy silver choker high around her throat, hiding the pale scar completely. The cold metal felt like an anchor. Breathe, Martha instructed, cinching the laces at her back. I can't, Cora wheezed. You'll learn. Weak wolves pant. Royal companions breathe from the diaphragm. When they finished, Cora barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The hollow cheeks remained, but shading had sharpened them into something regal rather than starved. Her dark hair was braided into a severe crown, threaded with silver wire. She looked dangerous. The heavy door opened, and Gideon entered, his travel gear gone, replaced by a high-collared charcoal tunic fastened in silver, a black bear fur cloak resting on his shoulders. He radiated quiet, crushing authority. He stopped a few feet away, sweeping his gaze over the transformation without a word of empty flattery. Does it fit? He asked, his voice rough enough to cut the quiet. It's heavy, she said honestly. I can barely bend at the waist. Good. You won't be bowing to anyone. He stepped closer, his scent of ozone and iron settling around her, steadying her. Desmond will look for the girl he threw away, feral, heartbroken. If you fidget, you lose. If you look down, you lose. Speak only when spoken to. And when you do, speak softly. Make them lean in to hear you. She held his gaze in the mirror. What if I freeze? What if I see him and just fall apart? He turned her by the shoulders to face him directly, his grip impersonal yet fiercely steadying. You won't break, because you won't be alone in that hall. You walk in under my crest. If he insults you, he insults the crown. If he lays a hand on you, it's an act of war. The full weight of the Northern Army stands behind you. Cora, let him see it. He drew a heavy silver signet ring from his pocket, bearing the same crowned wolf, and slid it onto her finger. Cold, weighty. You're no longer Cora of the Fringes, he murmured, stepping back. You are the honored companion of the king. Now, let's go ruin a wedding. The journey south took 2 days by carriage, and it was anything but quiet. Gideon's procession was built to be seen. 30 armored riders flanking the massive iron-bound carriage, royal banners snapping violently in the wind. The ground trembling under the synchronized thunder of war horses, dot crossing into Ashdown territory. The air itself seemed to change, thicker, heavier with pine and iron. Cora's stomach twisted into knots. She recognized every winding road, every stretch of evergreen forest, every jagged peak on the horizon. She'd hunted these woods. She'd bled on this ground, dot the road to Desmond's fortress, was lined with pack members expecting a parade of celebration. Instead, they got a military procession. Gideon's riders split the crowd apart with cold efficiency, and the onlookers, overwhelmed by the alpha aura radiating off the king, dropped their heads and bared their necks without thinking. Cora sat rigid inside, staring straight ahead. She could smell them all, the baker, the blacksmith, warriors she used to spar with, and they could smell her too. Confusion rippled through the crowd. The scent of the discarded mates, tangled with the terrifying weight of the king's presence. It broke something in their understanding of the world. Whispers spread like wildfire, chasing the carriage all the way to the gates. The iron gates groaned open. The courtyard overflowed with allied alphas in their finest furs, laughing over spiced wine. At the top of the stone steps stood Desmond, broad, handsome in a rough, self-assured way, wrapped in crimson wool with a heavy gold chain across his chest. Beside him stood Lyanna, tall and golden-haired, poured into perfectly tailored silk. They looked, on the surface, like the perfect ruling pair. The carriage rolled to a stop. Silence fell over the courtyard like a blade. Every eye fixed on the dark door. A guard pulled it open. Gideon stepped out first, ignoring the gasps and frantic bowing, and turned back to offer his hand. Cora drew a shallow breath against the whalebone corset and placed her gloved hand in his. She stepped out into the biting air. The silence shattered, not into noise, but into a collective gasp of pure shock. Gregory, near the bottom of the stairs, dropped his wine goblet. It shattered against the stones, splattering red across the snow. Cora didn't look at him. She fixed her eyes on the top of the stairs. Desmond's face had drained of color, his jaw hanging slack, his eyes wide with disbelief bordering on panic. He stared at the velvet gown, the choker hiding the mark he'd left behind, the heavy signet ring catching the light. Lyanna's confident smile flickered as she glanced. Between her new mate and the woman on the king's arm, Gideon tucked Cora's hand firmly into the crook of his elbow and began an unhurried walk toward the stairs, forcing every wolf present to watch. "Chin up," he murmured, low enough only she could hear. "You own this stone." She lifted her chin a fraction, heart hammering beneath a marble calm expression, and climbed the steps, her skirts whispering against granite. They stopped 2 steps below the couple. Gideon, still tall enough to look down at the Ashdown Alpha. Desmond recovered his composure fast, forcing a tight smile, bowing low in a gesture he clearly despised. "My king," he said, voice strained. "We're deeply honored. We didn't expect." His eyes flicked to Cora, venom flashing briefly through the mask. "Such a grand arrival." "Alpha Desmond," Gideon replied, flat and cold. "I received your invitation. The proposition of your union intrigued me. I decided to bring my honored companion to witness the spectacle." He gestured slightly toward Cora. Desmond's jaw clenched so hard, she thought she might hear his teeth crack. He was trapped, unable to insult the king's companion, no matter who she'd once been. "Welcome, Cora," he choked out. She didn't smile. She met him with the same flat, exhausted look she'd once worn while chopping wood. "Desmond," she said, voice smooth and steady, "thank you for the invitation. It's only fitting I witness you taking your place." She handed his own arrogant words straight back to him. His eyes flared with fury he could do nothing about. Lyanna, sensing the shift, stepped in quickly, looping her arm through Desmond's. "We're thrilled to host you both. Please, the feast begins in the Great Hall. The high table awaits." "Excellent," Gideon said, and without waiting for them to lead, walked forward, forcing the couple to step aside as he claimed the path for himself and Cora. As they passed, she caught it beneath his cologne and pine. Fear, sharp and bitter. The great hall was cavernous, timber-beamed, lit by roaring hearths and lined with banners of pack history. Long tables stretched across the stone floor, packed with the North's elite. At the far end sat the raised high table, meant for Desmond, Lyanna, and their families, a showcase of the newly unified power. Gideon dismantled that plan the second he entered. He bypassed the seat placed for him at Desmond's right, and instead pulled out the great carved chair at the very center, the Alpha's own seat, and gestured for Cora to sit. A murmur of disbelief swept the hall. Desmond arrived at the dais a beat later and stopped cold, his face flushing dark red. "My king," he said, voice tight to avoid a scene. "That seat is perfectly comfortable," Gideon interrupted, settling into the chair beside Cora, his amber eyes empty of warmth. "Unless you'd rather I sit with the squires by the door, Desmond." It was a blunt power play, a reminder of exactly who owned the ground beneath their feet. Desmond's chest heaved, and for a moment he looked ready to shift and tear something apart. But against a king, he had nothing. "Of course, my king," he ground out, forced to take the seat at Lyanna's left. Both of them pushed to the margins of their own high table. The feast began. Nervous servants rushed platters of roasted boar and venison to the tables, wine sloshing into goblets. The air in the hall was suffocating. No one was celebrating. They were watching an execution without blood. Cora sat straight-backed, the corset forcing perfect posture. She left the wine untouched, cutting her meat into precise, unhurried bites. Lyanna leaned forward, peering past Desmond, her smile strained. "I must say, Cora," she called, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "we were quite surprised the king's riders arrived with you in tow. We assumed you were still out in the fringe woods. Must be a shock to your system, being back in a hall like this." The room quieted, Alpha's leaning in for the show. Cora set her knife down without a flicker of embarrassment, turned, and met Lyanna's eyes evenly. "The fringe woods are peaceful, Lady Lyanna. They teach you to recognize predators, and how to spot scavengers." She offered a small, hollow smile. "The transition to this hall has been remarkably smooth. The company's much the same." A few alphas down the table coughed to hide their laughter. Lyanna's expression froze. She'd tried to belittle a peasant and been gutted with perfect politeness instead. Desmond slammed his goblet down, wine spilling across the linen. "Watch your tone," he hissed, leaning forward, his aura flaring aggressively. "You may be dressed in silk, Cora, but don't forget whose house you're in." Gideon said nothing. He simply stopped eating, turned his head, and looked at Desmond. No growl, no flare of power, just a stare. The weight of it hit Desmond like a physical blow, and his aura sputtered out instantly. He broke eye contact, staring at his plate, jaw tight. "Alpha Desmond is right," Cora said softly into the silence. Gideon raised an eyebrow at her. Desmond looked up, startled. "I am in your house," she continued, calm and even. She touched the silver choker at her throat. "The house where I was judged unworthy, where I was told a small wolf and no pedigree made me useless." She let her hand fall, the signet ring catching the firelight. "But I find it fascinating, Desmond." She leaned in slightly, holding his gaze without a trace of warmth. "You needed a political marriage thing just to secure your borders, months of negotiation to borrow power from the Riverlands." She let the pause stretch. "It took me 3 days to walk in on the arm of a king. Tell me, Alpha, who's the weak wolf now?" The hall went dead silent, the crackle of the hearths audible 50 feet away. Desmond's face went ashen. He had no answer. He'd summoned her to break her, and instead she'd dismantled his entire reign without ever raising her voice. Cora lifted her goblet and finally took a sip of wine. It tasted like triumph. The rest of the feast was a slow, agonizing collapse for the Ashdown Alpha. Cora never spoke to Desmond again that night. She didn't need to. The damage was already total. The visiting Alphas, seasoned political players, every one of them, smelled blood in the water. They just watched a fresh-crowned Alpha get humiliated at his own table, powerless to respond, because the king sat quietly beside his executioner. Conversation in the hall began shifting away from Desmond entirely. Eyes kept drifting to the center of the table instead. A lord from the eastern crags leaned in to ask Gideon about conditions in the high passes. An older Alpha from the iron mines raised his glass in a silent toast to Cora. The gravity of the room had moved. Desmond was no longer its center. Lyanna scrambled to reclaim the narrative. Louder music, more wine, a laugh pitched to sharp over the cello strings. None of it worked. She was a beautiful bride seated beside a neutered wolf through it all. Cora sat still, her back aching under the whalebone, the velvet dragging at her like lead, but her chin stayed high, her hands relaxed in her lap. Beside her, Gideon radiated calm, controlled heat. He didn't gloat, didn't need to. His mere presence was enough to strip Desmond's authority bare. When the final course was cleared, Gideon rose, and the hall fell silent again. "Alpha Desmond," he said, his voice carrying to the rafters, "your hospitality is noted. We'll retire for the evening. See that my guards are quartered comfortably." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply offered his arm to Cora. She rose, ignoring the vicious cramp in her thigh, and they walked the length of the hall together, the crowd parting, heads bowing, eyes down. The moment the heavy doors shut behind them, cutting off the noise, Cora stopped. She released his arm and leaned back against the cold stone wall. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last hour crashed all at once. Her knees buckled slightly. Her hands began shaking uncontrollably. Gideon didn't crowd her. He stepped back, giving her space, and pulled a flat silver flask from beneath his cloak. Holding it out, she took it with both hands to keep it steady and drank. Not wine, mountain whiskey, smoky and fierce, burning a trail down to her stomach and chasing off the corridor's chill. She coughed and handed it back. "Thank you, you're shaking," he observed, watching her closely in the dim torchlight. "It's the cold," she lied. "It's the crash," he corrected gently, taking a pull from the flask himself. "Violence takes something out of the body, and what you did in there was violence, plain and simple." She let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob, pressing her palms against her eyes. He looked so small, Gideon. "I spent 6 months thinking he was some unstoppable force that crushed me. Tonight he just looked desperate. Tyrants usually are," Gideon said, leaning against the opposite wall, watching her carefully. He built his entire sense of self on other people submitting to him. "You tore that away," showed him the scaffolding underneath. "It's a terrifying thing for a man like that to realize his power only exists because people agree to hand it to him." Tonight, the room stopped agreeing. She lowered her hands, her carefully painted face tied beneath the makeup. "Did I wreck his alliances?" "You planted the doubt," he said practically. "The Eastern Lords respect strength. They saw none tonight. Only a man who can't control his own past, let alone his future. By morning, half of them will be sending ravens to my estate, looking to deal directly with the crown. So your trip was a success. Our trip," he corrected softly. "I built the stage. You swung the axe." He pushed off the wall, the rough, practical king returning. "Rest. Tomorrow's the bonding ceremony. The final act needs an audience." He walked her to her chamber door, gave a short nod, and disappeared down the hall. Boots silent on the stone. Inside, the room dwarfed her old cabin. A fire already crackling in the hearth. 2 guards posted outside her door. She peeled off the heavy velvet, unclasped the choker, and set it on the vanity. In the mirror, the pale scar at her throat stared back at her. She touched it. For the first time in 6 months, it didn't ache. The phantom pain was simply gone. Just scar tissue now, numb and finished. Desmond had cut her open. She was the one who'd finally sealed the wound shut. The moonstone stood in the fortress courtyard, an ancient slab of jagged obsidian older than the Ashdown pack itself, where oaths were sworn and souls bound. The morning was bitterly cold, the sky flat and grey, thick with the threat of a coming blizzard. The entire pack, along with every visiting dignitary, formed a wide circle around the stone, breath rising in pale clouds. Mixing with pine smoke from the iron braziers, Cora watched from the high balcony, wrapped in black fox fur. The silver choker cinched tight once more. Gideon stood beside her, hands resting on the stone railing, both of them removed from the crowd below, elevated, watching like judges dot down in the courtyard. Desmond and Liana approached the stone in ceremonial white leathers, stripped of armor and fur to symbolize purity before the goddess. Desmond looked wrecked, the confident swagger from yesterday replaced by stiff, mechanical movement, dark circles ringing his eyes. Liana walked at his side, her expression a mask of practiced serenity. though tension coiled visibly in her shoulders. The humiliation of the feast still hung over both of them. Gregory, serving as officiant, stood by the stone holding a silver bowl and ceremonial dagger, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. The chanting began, a low, guttural hum meant to sound like celebration. Today it sounded closer to a funeral dirge. "He's looking for you," Gideon murmured, eyes fixed on the scene below. "Let him look," Cora said. UNMOVING. Desmond took the dagger from Gregory and sliced his palm. Dark blood welled instantly against the white leather. He held his hand over the bowl, letting it drip, then stopped. He didn't hand the blade to Lyanna. Instead, his head tilted back, eyes scanning the fortress walls, past the banners, past the smoking braziers, until they found the balcony. Even from 100 feet away, Cora felt the weight of his stare. The look of a man jolted awake from a long, arrogant dream to find his house on fire. In that instant, every calculation, every political maneuver, every desperate grab for strength collapsed. He saw her standing beside the king, wrapped in royal fur, utterly untouchable, and remembered the woman who used to laugh in his kitchen, who split her own firewood, who used to look at him like he was the only man alive. He'd traded absolute loyalty for a political transaction, and now he stood freezing, about to bind his soul to a woman who'd spent the whole morning berating him for the humiliation at his own table. Cora didn't flinch. She stared back, her expression unreadable. No pity, no lingering love, nothing at all. His hand trembled. A drop of blood missed the bowl, splattering onto white snow. Lyanna cleared her throat sharply, cutting through the chanting, and snatched the dagger from his slack grip. She sliced her own palm, without hesitation, and squeezed her fist over the bowl, mixing their blood together. Gregory began the closing invocation, binding their spirits before the pack. When the ritual ended, a cheer rose from the Ashdown wolves, loud, but missing the wild joy of a true bonding. The allied alphas clapped politely. Desmond didn't kiss his new mate. He simply stared down at the bowl of mixed blood, his face bloodless. "It's done," Gideon said quietly, turning from the railing. "We leave within the hour. Gather your things." Cora watched Desmond one moment longer, then turned her back on the courtyard for good and followed the king inside. The black carriage waited below, the vanguard already mounted, iron armor clinking impatiently. The blizzard that had threatened all morning finally broke loose, thick flakes sticking instantly to the stones. Cora stood near the open carriage door dressed for travel. Heavy wool trousers, a thick sweater, a sturdy fur-lined coat from Martha, the velvet gown and silver choker were packed away in a trunk. She felt like herself again, just a stronger, more armored version. "My king." Desmond stood at the base of the fortress steps, still in the blooded white ceremonial leathers, no cloak against the falling snow. He looked wrecked. Lyanna was nowhere in sight, likely already inside cementing her place among the pack elders. Gideon turned slowly to face him, but said nothing, only waited. Desmond swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on Cora instead of the king. He stepped forward, hands twitching at his sides. "Cora, he stopped, throat working, clearly wanting to apologize, to explain the politics and pressure that had driven him to break her, wanting absolution he had no right to. Cora reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the crumpled invitation. Its red wax long broken, its edges soft from the miles it had traveled with her, the gold script still perfectly legible. She crossed to him, boots crunching in the fresh snow, stopping just a feet away, well inside the space that used to belong only two lovers. He looked down at her, eyes wide, silently begging for a scrap of the warmth she'd once given so freely. She held out the invitation. He didn't take it. "You wanted my presence," she said, voice quiet, free of malice, simply a statement of fact. "You wanted me to watch your new power. You wanted me to accept my place." She reached out and tucked the paper into the front of his ceremonial tunic, patting it once, a gesture so dismissive it made him flinch. "I accept it," she said. "Enjoy your marriage, Desmond." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned and walked straight to the carriage. Gideon offered his hand. She took it and climbed inside. He followed, pulling the heavy door shut, the lock clicking into place with finality. "Move out," Gideon called to his captain through the window. The carriage lurched forward, wheels crushing snow as it rumbled through the fortress gates, and away from Ashdown for good. Cora sank back against the leather seat and closed her eyes. 6 months of tension drained from her shoulders all at once, leaving her light, almost hollow. It was finished. The ghost was buried. They rode in silence for a long while, nothing but howling wind and the steady thud of hooves. The road climbed away from the pine forests, back toward the frozen peaks of the king's own territory. Gideon sat across from her, legs stretched out, watching the snow streak past the window. "You didn't have to hand in the invitation," he said eventually, without turning from the glass. "You'd already won." "I didn't do it to win," she said, opening her eyes. "I did it to give it back. It was heavy. I didn't want to carry it anymore." He turned his head, amber eyes settling on her. The sharp, tactical king from the feast gone, replaced by the rough man from the fire again. "The arrangement's complete," he said, voice lower now, stripped of court authority. "You disrupted his alliances. You served your purpose." She nodded slowly. "And you gave me my revenge. Debt settled both ways." She tilted her head. "So where do you drop me?" "Nearest trading town." He frowned, an expression that looked foreign on his usually unreadable face. "I told you on the mountain. You have a place in my court. I heard what you said," she replied, drawing her knees up, settling in. "But that was the pitch to get me in the carriage. I'm a feral half-blood, Gideon. I don't belong in high halls forever. You don't need a fake companion anymore." He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The carriage swayed hard over a rut, but he stayed perfectly still, a fixed point in the small space. "I don't want a fake companion," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "I have a court full of politicians," he went on, eyes locked onto hers with that same unshakable intensity from their first night by the fire. "Generals who tell me only what I want to hear. Nobles who smile to my face and plot behind my back. What I don't have is someone who'll eat a child rabbit in the snow, stare down a king, and tell him to keep his pity to himself." He reached across the space between them, not grabbing her hand, just resting his palm open on the seat beside her knee. An invitation, genuine this time. "A council seat isn't a reward for playing a part, Cora. It's an offer to the woman who played it. You survived the fringes. You survived a broken bond. You walked into a den of wolves and made an alpha choke on his own pride." His mouth twitched, the faintest hint of a smile breaking through his beard. "I need that mind on my council. I need someone to remind me a crown doesn't stop a man from snapping a dry twig and ruining a hunt." Cora looked at his scarred, open palm. She thought of the cold, empty cabin waiting in the fringes, of endless running and hiding, of the quiet, pitiful life of a discarded wolf. Then she looked at the king of the north, the man who'd handed her a sword when everyone else had told her to lie down and bleed. She reached out without hesitation and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, grounding. No fated spark, no explosion of destiny, just a firm, unbreakable grip of two survivors, recognizing steel in one another. "A council seat," she murmured, a real, cynical smile breaking across her face at last. "I suppose that means the corset's coming back." Gideon let out a booming laugh that drowned out the blizzard outside. "Only when we have company worth terrifying. The rest of the time, the king commands you wear whatever you damn well please." The carriage rolled deeper into the northern mountains, leaving the ghost of Ashdown buried under the snow for good. Claude is AI, and can